Good morning. I'm here today to preach about hope and love. And what better sign to evoke hope and love than a great feast? On this mountain, Isaiah says, the Lord of hosts will prepare a feast for all. And what better feast of hope and love than a wedding feast? Over the past 2 decades, I've officiated a variety of weddings. The ones that stand out are the unusual ones. The deaf couple whose friends raucously raised their hands in joyous applause. The Chinese couple whose families from different provinces and time zones in China Skyped in on 2 separate laptops, which we set on the altar so they could see one another and all of us, in order to witness the exact timing of the wedding that needed to be concluded at precisely 11 minutes past the hour in order for it to be an auspicious beginning. And we did it. And then there's the one I'll be officiating later this week for a couple here who can't get back to California for the big gathering of friends and families. So it'll just be the 2 of them, their dog, the photographer, and me at an Airbnb outside of Deary. Let's check in on this one that the king is throwing for his son. Uh-oh, someone came in wearing the wrong clothes. Bind him hand and foot and throw him into the outer darkness where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Earlier this past week, my pastor friends from Lewiston, Clarkston, and I were reading these texts. And when we got to that passage, Pastor Peg from Grace ELCA Church in the Orchard said, "See, that's why I'm reading Philippians." And oh, what a brilliant idea. Let's look at Philippians. Years ago, the Bishop of California urged us clergy to think of this as a fundraising thank you letter from the Apostle Paul to the Christians in Philippi, his first European church. I can't really get that thought out of my head, especially as we move into our season of stewardship. While Paul is indeed asking them to dig deep to support his collection for the needy, most of what Paul does in this letter is go over the top with thanks and praise for the people of that community of faithful people. Some of the most beautiful language I've ever heard about how we should be talking to one another. Children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and perverse generation in which you shine like stars in the world. My brothers and sisters, my siblings whom I love and long for, my joy and crown. And then he mentions Ewodia and Syntyche, pillars of the congregation, who have been battling one another, and he urges the congregation to help these women, for they have struggled beside me in the work of the gospel, along with the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. So yes, indeed, let us, like Pastor Peg, hang out with the Philippians. And we'll come back there in just a bit. But first, we have been invited to a wedding. Our other readings set up the imagery, the great feast of the Lord. And in the 23rd Psalm, food laid out before us in the presence of our enemies, our heads anointed with oil. Who would turn down an invitation like that? Well, in this parable, apparently lots of people turn it down. This is what the kingdom of heaven is, right? There's actually another version of the banquet story that the guests won't go to in Luke's gospel. But it's a rich man, and it isn't a wedding. And even there, the invitees come up with every lame excuse possible. But no one dies in that version. It's just the rich man telling his servants to go out into the highways and byways to bring in everyone to enjoy the feast, which is really the point of Jesus' parable about the kingdom of heaven in Matthew's gospel. We're going to have all sorts of people there. And the added bits about the king and the wedding banquet and the murder and burning down their city. Well, hang on just a bit. Let's just get back to the heart of the story. Everyone gets invited to the wedding, from the highways and the byways. People who have no business being there. It's like another set of Matthew's parables of the kingdom from the 13th chapter, when the kingdom of heaven is like a big catch of fish, fish of every kind. When the net was full, they drew it ashore, sat down, and put the good into baskets and threw out the bad. And so it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous and throw them into the furnace of fire, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's that weeping and gnashing of teeth. Well, and that is Matthew. Matthew's gospel is full of that phrase, and even when Matthew is trying to be all-inclusive, it's full of judgment, of who's in and who's out. Matthew and the community he is writing for have lived through the cataclysmic destruction of Jerusalem by the Roman army, the tearing down of the temple, reducing it to rubble. In the wake of that disaster, competing religious voices were simultaneously saying that we are the true followers of God and you are the ones who caused this disaster. And we have seen that ourselves in the wake of the attacks on September 11th, 2001, in firestorms in the West, in the rolling disaster that is the pandemic. And don't imagine that we're not being judgmental or that God doesn't have something to say. God does have something to say about consequences. If you murder those who were sent by God, you are going to meet a violent end. If you don't wear the right clothes to the wedding feast, wait, okay, look at your bulletin for a minute, at the icon on the front with the people being invited to the big party. The one issuing the invitation, one of the king's slaves, is carrying a white garment over his arm. Maybe it's the baptismal garment that was worn by new Christians in the early church, like the alb worn by ministers at the table at Holy Eucharist, the uniform of the baptized. It's certainly a distressing part of the story, so distressing that St. Augustine, one of the early church's great theologians, struggled with it in his sermon on the New Testament and describes himself rummaging through the letters of Paul to find some way of understanding such a dire consequence for a seeming faux pas. And yes, there it is. The thing we are to clothe ourselves in is what Paul describes in his letter to the Christians in Corinth. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. Precious garments, says Augustine. That is what we put on when we are invited to the banquet of the wedding feast of the Son of the King of Kings, the precious garment of love. So let's go back to Philippians to send us on our way, shall we? Beloved, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is pleasing, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence and if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things and keep on doing the things that you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you.